Some sounds pierce straight through to your soul, cutting deeper than any blade. The desperate cry of a child reaches places in a parent's heart that time can never heal. In the drought-stricken frontier of the 1800s, a weary cowboy notices his young donkey fixated on the old stone well. When he peers inside, he discovers faint cries of a child trapped at the bottom, abandoned and left for dead. With no one else around for miles, he must risk everything to save the child while confronting painful memories of his own lost daughter. But saving this innocent life will force him to face a terrible, haunting truth. What could possibly drive someone to abandon their very own child in a well to die? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Samuel Garrett had learned to measure his days not by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the depth of shadows cast by drought-cracked earth. At 52, his hands bore the testimony of 3 decades working this unforgiving patch of Texas frontier. Calloused palms that had once been soft enough to cradle a newborn daughter. Weathered fingers that had closed his wife's eyes for the final time just 3 summers past. The morning air hung thick and still, carrying the familiar scent of dust and dying grass. Sam stood on the porch of his modest cabin, surveying the land that had once flourished under his care. Where green pastures had rolled like ocean waves in his memory, now stretched an endless expanse of brown stubble and cracked earth. The drought of 1847 had lasted 8 months already, with no promise of relief dancing on the cloudless horizon. His eyes found the young donkey grazing near the old stone well, and a familiar warmth spread through his chest. Keeper had arrived at the ranch. As an orphaned cub 2 springs ago, barely weaned, and more bones than flesh. Sam had found him wandering the property line, likely separated from a traveling merchant's pack train during one of the fierce storms that spring. Martha would have scolded him for taking in another mouth to feed, but she would have done the same thing. She had possessed a heart too tender for this harsh land, yet somehow strong enough to call it home for 23 years. The donkey had earned his name through a peculiar habit of watching over things. Chickens, the old milk cow, even Sam himself, when illness had laid him low the previous winter. Keeper possessed an intelligence that surprised visitors, though Sam had stopped expecting visitors months ago. The drought had driven most neighbors deeper into town or further west toward more promising land. Sam descended the porch steps, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each footfall. The leather had long since faded from rich brown to the color of dried mud, and the soles had been resoled twice by his own inexpert hand. He approached Keeper with the slow, measured pace of a man who had learned to conserve his energy for the battles that mattered. "Morning, old friend," Sam murmured, running a hand along the donkey's neck. Keeper's coat had grown coarse in the heat, but underneath, Sam could feel the solid muscle that had developed from hauling water from the distant creek day after day. "Find anything interesting this morning?" Keeper lifted his head from the sparse grass and fixed his large, dark eyes on the stone well 20 paces away. The well had been Sam's pride when he first built it, lined with carefully fitted stones and topped with a wooden windlass that could draw water from 40 feet below. For 15 years it had served the family faithfully, until the underground spring that fed it had mysteriously dried up the same year Martha took sick. Sam had sealed the opening with heavy planks and iron fittings, partly for safety and partly because the sight of that empty hole had reminded him too much of the hollow space in his chest where his family's laughter used to live. Yet Keeper seemed drawn to it with increasing frequency, often spending entire mornings standing vigil beside the sealed opening as if listening for something only he could hear. "That old well's been dry for 3 years, son," Sam said, though. He found himself following the donkey's gaze. Nothing down there but dust and spiders now. The cabin behind them held the accumulated memories of a lifetime. Furniture crafted by Sam's own hands, quilts stitched by Martha during long winter evenings, and toys carved for Lucy during those precious 5 years when their daughter had filled every corner with joy. Most painful among these relics was Martha's worn leather Bible, its pages soft as cloth from years of faithful reading. Sam had found it pressed beneath her pillow after the fever took her, open to the 23rd Psalm, with a pressed wildflower marking the verse about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. He kept the Bible on the kitchen table now, though he rarely opened it. Faith had become a complicated thing since losing his family. Some days he felt Martha's presence so strongly he would set 3 plates for supper out of habit. Other days, the silence pressed against him like a physical weight, and he wondered if God had simply forgotten about this small corner of creation. Lucy had been 7 when the accident happened, all bright eyes and boundless curiosity. She had inherited Martha's gentleness and Sam's stubborn determination, a combination that had made her fearless in exploring every corner of their property. The creek had been running high that spring from mountain snowmelt, and Lucy had been playing too close to the unstable bank while Sam worked in the far pasture. By the time he heard Martha's screams and reached the water, his daughter had already been swept beyond his reach. The guilt had nearly consumed him. If he had been watching more carefully, if he had fixed the fence that would have kept her away from the creek, if he had simply paid attention to the warning signs, the list of if-only moments had grown into a crushing weight that sometimes made it hard to breathe. Martha had tried to comfort him, reminding him that accidents happened and that God had called Lucy home for reasons beyond their understanding. But Sam had seen the blame in his wife's eyes during unguarded moments, and he knew she was right to hold him responsible. When Martha fell ill 2 years later, Sam had thrown himself into caring for her with desperate intensity. He consulted every doctor within 100 miles, tried every remedy suggested by well-meaning neighbors, and spent his life savings on medicines shipped from back east. But the fever had taken her anyway, leaving him alone with his grief and 1,000 daily reminders of the life they had built together. The ranch had 17 head of cattle left from a herd that had once numbered over 200. The drought had forced him to sell most of his stock at ruinous prices, and the remaining animals grew thinner each day, despite his efforts to find adequate grazing. His nearest neighbor, the Hendricks family, had abandoned their claim 6 weeks ago, loading their possessions into a single wagon and heading east toward more populous country. Sam understood their decision. The land that had once supported dozens of families now struggled to sustain a handful. Creek beds that had run year-round in his memory now lay cracked and empty, marked only by the bleached bones of cattle that had died seeking water. The government land office in Austin had stopped recording new claims in the region, and rumors spoke of entire counties being abandoned to the sun and wind. Yet something kept Sam anchored to this place, beyond mere stubbornness. Perhaps it was the 2 grave markers on the hill behind the cabin, carved from native limestone and weathered by seasons of extremes. Martha had chosen this spot for their homestead, declaring it the most beautiful place she had ever seen. Lucy had taken her first steps in the shade of the old oak tree that still sheltered the house, and her laughter had echoed from every corner of the property. Keeper wandered closer to the well, his ears pricked forward as if listening intently. The donkey had been acting strangely for several days now, abandoning his usual routines to spend long periods near the sealed opening. Sam had initially attributed the behavior to the heat, affecting the animal's judgment, but Keeper showed no other signs of distress or illness. The stone well sat in a slight depression, about 50 yards from the cabin, positioned to catch runoff during the rare occasions when rain fell. Sam had selected each stone personally, choosing pieces that would fit together tightly without mortar and create a barrier that would last for generations. The craftsmanship had been one of his proudest achievements, a testament to skills learned from his father during their brief time together before consumption claimed the older man. Sam approached the well slowly, noting how Keeper stepped aside to allow him access while maintaining his intense focus on the wooden cover. The planks remained securely in place, held by iron bands that showed no signs of disturbance. Yet something in the donkey's behavior suggested urgency, as if he were trying to communicate important information through the only means available to him. "What is it, boy?" Sam asked, kneeling beside Keeper and placing a hand on the warm stone. "What's got you so interested in this old hole?" The wind had stilled completely, creating an oppressive silence that seemed to press against Sam's eardrums. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily over the brown expanse of his southern pasture, probably hunting for the prairie dogs that had managed to survive by digging deeper into the earth. The sight reminded Sam of his own desperate search for water, the endless hours spent walking fence lines and examining dry creek beds for any sign of moisture. Keeper nudged Sam's shoulder gently, then returned his attention to the well with unwavering focus. The donkey's ears remained pricked forward, rotating slightly, as if trying to locate a specific sound. Sam found himself holding his breath, straining to hear whatever had captured Keeper's attention so completely. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant cry of the circling hawk and the whisper of wind through the dried grass. Sam remained kneeling beside the well, one hand resting on Keeper's neck and the other pressed against the sun-warmed stone. In that moment of stillness, surrounded by the vast emptiness of his drought-stricken land, he felt the weight of his solitude more keenly than ever. Yet Keeper's presence provided a small comfort, a reminder that even in this desolate place, life persisted, and connections could be forged across the barriers of species and circumstance. The donkey had become more than a working animal. He had become a companion, a witness to Sam's daily struggles, and perhaps the only creature on earth who truly understood the rhythms of his lonely existence. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows across the brittle landscape, Sam stood and dusted off his knees. Whatever had captured Keeper's attention would remain a mystery for now, but the donkey's behavior had planted a seed of curiosity that would continue to grow throughout the day. "Come on, old friend," Sam said, turning toward the barn. "We've got work to do, and the day's already heating up." But as they walked away from the well, Sam found himself glancing back over his shoulder, wondering what secrets might lie hidden beneath those weathered planks and iron bands. The day had grown, sweltering by noon, with heat shimmering off the baked earth in visible waves. Sam had spent the morning mending fence and checking his remaining cattle, but his mind kept drifting back to Keeper's peculiar behavior at the well. Throughout their work, the donkey had remained unusually quiet, his typical curiosity replaced by an almost melancholy preoccupation. When they returned to the cabin for the midday meal, Sam noticed Keeper had immediately resumed his vigil beside the sealed well. The donkey stood motionless, head cocked at an angle that suggested intense concentration. Something about the animal's posture triggered a memory of Lucy during her final winter, when she would sit by the window for hours listening to sounds that seemed to exist beyond Sam's range of hearing. "You're starting to worry me, boy," Sam muttered, setting down his water bucket and approaching the well with more purpose than he had shown that morning. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you were hearing things." Keeper shifted slightly to allow Sam closer access, but his attention never wavered from the wooden planks. As Sam knelt beside the well's stone rim, he noticed something that made his breath catch, a small scrap of blue fabric caught on one of the rough stone edges, so faded and weathered that he had missed it during casual glances. His hands trembled slightly as he worked the fabric free. The material was cotton, fine enough to suggest it had come from a dress rather than work clothes. The edges were torn rather than cut, indicating it had been snagged in haste or desperation. Most troubling was the fabric's condition. While weathered by exposure, it showed signs of recent placement. This wasn't some relic from years past. Sam examined the iron bands that secured the wooden cover, noting for the first time that one of the fittings appeared slightly loose. The rust patterns around the bolts suggested recent disturbance, though so subtle that only careful inspection would reveal it. His pulse quickened as he realized that someone had been at this well. And recently. Easy now, he whispered to Keeper, though uncertainty whether he was reassuring the donkey or himself. Let's see what's got you so worked up. Sam retrieved his toolkit from the barn and returned to begin carefully loosening the iron bands. Each bolt required patient work with his wrench, the metal having expanded and contracted through countless seasons. As he worked, Keeper pressed closer, his breathing becoming more agitated with each turn of the bolts. The first plank came free with a groan of protest from warped wood. Sam set it aside and peered into the narrow gap he had created, seeing only impenetrable darkness below. The familiar smell of stagnant air and old stone rose from the opening, but underneath lay something else, something that made his stomach clench with recognition: the smell of human distress. Sam removed the remaining planks with increasing urgency, his hands working automatically while his mind raced through possibilities he didn't want to consider. When the opening lay fully exposed, he called into the depths with a voice that cracked despite his efforts to remain steady. "Hello? Is someone down there?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Sam held his breath, straining to hear any response from the darkness below. Keeper pressed against his shoulder, trembling with an anxiety that had infected Sam as well. Then it came, so faint he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. A weak cry that pierced through the shadows like a knife through his heart. The sound was unmistakably that of a child, barely audible, but filled with such desperate hope that Sam felt tears spring to his eyes before he could stop them. "Sweet Lord," he breathed, gripping the stone rim until his knuckles turned white. "Hello down there, I'm going to help you." The response came stronger this time, a sobbing voice that carried words he couldn't quite make out, but conveyed urgency and terror in equal measure. Sam's mind reeled as he tried to process the reality of finding a child trapped in his sealed well. How long had they been down there? How had they gotten past his security measures? And most horrifying, who had left them there to die? His practical nature asserted itself through the shock. The well was roughly 30 feet deep, with sheer stone walls that would be impossible to climb, even for a healthy adult. The child, for the voice was definitely that of a young child, would need to be pulled up with rope and considerable care. Any mistake could result in further injury or death. Sam rushed to the barn, Keeper following close behind, and gathered every piece of rope he possessed. His climbing experience was limited to basic ranch work, but Martha had often reminded him that desperate times called for courage rather than expertise. As he worked to create a makeshift rescue system, his hands shook with a combination of urgency and buried grief. The child's voice rose again from the well, calling for Mama, with a heartbreak that nearly brought Sam to his knees. The word triggered a flood of memories. Lucy calling for Martha during her final moments in the creek, Martha calling for their daughter during the fever dreams that preceded her death. The cycle of loss and abandonment seemed to follow him like a curse, and now he faced the possibility of another child dying while he stood helpless to prevent it. But this time would be different. This time he was here, he was capable, and he would not fail. Sam tested the strength of his rope against the barn's main support beam, satisfied that it would hold both his weight and that of a child. He secured one end around his waist and the other to the well's stone framework, checking and rechecking every knot with the methodical care of a man who understood that mistakes cost lives. Keeper remained stationed beside the well, his ears pricked forward as if maintaining contact with the trapped child through some form of communication Sam couldn't perceive. The donkey's behavior had become protective, almost parental, and Sam found himself drawing strength from the animal's unwavering focus. "I'm coming down," Sam called into the well, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Try to stay calm, child. I'm going to get you out of there." The descent proved more challenging than anticipated. The rope cut into his shoulders despite the padding he had improvised, and the stone walls scraped against his back as he lowered himself into the narrow space. The temperature dropped noticeably as he moved away from the surface, but the air grew thick and stagnant with each foot of progress. 15 feet down, Sam could make out the pale outline of a small figure huddled at the bottom of the well. 20 feet down, he could see that it was indeed a child, a little girl who appeared to be perhaps 4 or 5 years old, dressed in what had once been a blue dress, but was now torn and stained beyond recognition. "I see you, sweetheart," Sam called, his voice gentler now as he fought to control his emotions. "I'm almost there. What's your name?" The child looked up at him with eyes that reflected what little light filtered down from above. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, and her small body shook with exhaustion and fear. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but Sam heard the single word that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Emma. The name struck him like a physical blow. Emma. The name Martha had chosen for the daughter they had hoped would follow Lucy. The child who had never been born due to complications that had weakened Martha's health long before the final fever. Emma, a ghost from the future they had planned but never lived. As Sam reached the bottom of the well and gathered the trembling child into his arms, he realized that Keeper's vigil had led him to more than just a rescue mission. This moment represented a crossroads where his past grief and future hope intersected in the most unexpected way possible. The child clung to him with desperate strength, her small hands gripping his shirt as if he might disappear like a dream. Through her tears, she whispered words that would change everything Sam thought he understood about his solitary existence. "I knew you would come," Emma whispered against his chest. "Mama said someone good would find me." Sam closed his eyes and held her close, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a familiar burden. Whatever had brought this child to his well, whatever circumstances had led to her abandonment in this terrible place, one thing was certain: he would not let her down. The real challenge, he realized as he prepared for the dangerous ascent with precious cargo, was just beginning. Sam's mind raced as he held Emma at the bottom of the well, calculating the mechanics of getting them both safely to the surface. The rope that had carried him down now seemed inadequate for the return journey, frayed hemp that had seen too many seasons and bore too many scars from ranch work. Each strand represented a calculated risk, and with Emma's life depending on his decisions, those calculations took on a weight that made his chest tighten with anxiety. "Emma, sweetheart," Sam said softly, adjusting his grip to support her slight frame more securely. "I need you to hold on to me very tight while we go up. Can you do that for me?" The child nodded against his shoulder, her small arms tightening around his neck with surprising strength. Up close, Sam could assess her condition more clearly. She appeared dehydrated but alert, with several scrapes on her arms and legs that had scabbed over. Most concerning was the way she favored her left arm, suggesting a possible injury that would require careful handling during the ascent. "How long have you been down here, Emma?" Sam asked, beginning the slow process of securing her to his body. "With a spare length of rope, 2 sleeps," she whispered, her voice hoarse from calling for help. "Mama brought me here when the moon was big, but then she went away and didn't come back. 2 days. Sam felt his jaw clench as he processed the implications. Someone had deliberately placed this child in the well and abandoned her to die, a key level of cruelty that challenged his understanding of human nature. The image of Emma's mother, bringing her here in the moonlight, filled him with a rage that threatened to cloud his judgment, and he forced himself to focus on the immediate task. First attempt at ascending proved disastrous almost immediately. Sam had misjudged the additional weight Emma's presence would add to the rope system, and the hemp began to stretch and fray under the combined load. 10 feet up from the bottom, several strands snapped with an audible crack that sent them sliding back down the stone wall in a controlled fall that left Sam's back scraped raw and Emma crying with renewed terror. "It's all right, sweetheart," Sam soothed, though his own confidence was badly shaken. "We just need to try a different way." But it wasn't all right, and Sam knew it. The rope was failing, his strength was limited, and Emma's condition was deteriorating. With each passing hour, as he examined the damage to their lifeline, memories of Lucy's accident flooded back with painful clarity. He remembered the helpless feeling of watching her disappear beneath the creek's muddy water, the way his desperate grab for her hand had come up empty, the sound of Martha's screams echoing across the pasture. "I couldn't save her," he whispered. To himself, the words barely audible in the well's confining space. "I couldn't save my own daughter." Emma stirred in his arms, her fever-bright eyes looking up at him with a trust that felt like a physical weight. "Are you sad, mister?" The question pierced through his self-doubt with startling directness. Here was a child who had every reason to despair, yet she was concerned about his emotional state. The simple empathy in her voice reminded him of Lucy's own gentle nature, the way his daughter had always seemed to sense when others needed comfort. "I'm not sad," Sam said, surprised to find that he meant it. "I'm just figuring out the best way to get us home." He spent the next hour analyzing their situation with the methodical approach that had served him well during his ranching years. The rope was compromised, but not entirely useless. By redistributing the weight and creating additional anchor points, he might be able to make the ascent in stages rather than attempting it in one continuous climb. Using his knife, Sam cut away the damaged sections of rope and retied the connections with improved knots. He created a simple harness for Emma that would distribute her weight more evenly and reduce the strain on his arms during the climb. Most importantly, he established a series of rest points where he could transfer their weight to the stone walls, rather than relying entirely on the rope. "Tell me about your mama, Emma," Sam said as he worked, partly to keep her calm and partly to gather information that might explain their circumstances. "What's her name?" "Sarah," Emma replied, her voice gaining strength as she warmed to the topic. "She makes the best cornbread in the whole world, and she knows all the songs about angels. She said the bad men were coming, and she had to hide me somewhere safe until she could come back. Bad men." Sam's hands paused in their work as he processed this new information. Emma's abandonment hadn't been an act of cruelty by her mother, but a desperate attempt to protect her from some greater threat. The realization shifted his anger from Sarah to whoever had forced her into such an impossible choice. "Did your mama say anything else about these bad men?" Sam asked carefully. Emma nodded solemnly. "They took our farm and hurt Papa before he went to heaven. Mama said they were looking for something, but she didn't know what." Sam's expression hardened as a picture began to emerge. Land disputes had become increasingly common as the drought forced families to abandon their claims, and certain groups of men had developed a reputation for claiming abandoned properties through intimidation rather than legal means. The description suggested that Sarah and Emma had fallen victim to one of these roving bands. With his preparations complete, Sam attempted the ascent for the second time. The improved system worked better initially, allowing them to progress in careful stages with regular rest stops. Emma proved to be a brave companion, following his instructions without complaint, and even offering encouragement when his strength began to flag. But 15 feet from the surface, disaster struck again. The anchor point Sam had established in the stonework pulled loose under their combined weight, sending them sliding back down several feet before he could arrest their fall. The jolt sent shooting pains through his shoulders and elicited a cry of pain from Emma that suggested her injured arm had been further damaged. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Sam gasped, fighting to maintain his grip on both the rope and Emma. "We're going to try again, but I need to rest for a few minutes first." As they hung suspended in the well's narrow confines, Sam found himself thinking about Martha's unwavering faith in the face of adversity. She had often quoted a verse about God not giving people more than they could bear, though Sam had struggled with that concept since losing his family. Perhaps this moment, holding another man's daughter in his arms while fighting to save her life, was God's way of offering him a chance at redemption. Above them, keepers' concerned whinnying echoed down the stone walls, a reminder that even if Sam failed, someone would know what had happened here. The thought provided small comfort, but it also strengthened his resolve. He would not let Emma become another tragedy in his life's collection of failures. "Hold on tight, Emma," Sam said, beginning to prepare for their third attempt. "We're going home." Sam's third attempt at climbing from the well had to be abandoned before it truly began, when Emma's injured arm proved unable to maintain her grip around his neck. The child's brave facade crumbled as pain overwhelmed her determination, and her tears of frustration mingled with Sam's own growing despair. They were trapped, not by the stone walls or the depth of the well, but by the limitations of human endurance and makeshift equipment. "We need help, don't we?" Emma asked with the stark honesty that children possess before the world taught them to soften hard truths. "Mama always said it was okay to ask for help when you couldn't do something by yourself." Sam nodded, though admitting defeat felt like swallowing ground glass. In the pocket of his vest, Martha's silver locket pressed against his ribs, a weight he had carried every day since her funeral. Inside lay a curl of Lucy's hair, golden as summer wheat and soft as hope itself. Martha had given him the locket during their final conversation, making him promise to remember that love persisted even when the people who created it were gone. "Your mama sounds like a wise woman," Sam said, adjusting his position to take some pressure off his aching shoulders. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit when we need a different approach." But different approaches required resources Sam didn't possess. His nearest neighbor had abandoned their claim weeks ago, and the town of Cedar Falls lay 30 miles east, too far to travel for help without leaving Emma alone in the well for the better part of 2 days. The mathematics of their situation grew more dire with each passing hour. Emma's breathing had become labored, though whether from her injuries or the stagnant air in the well was difficult to determine. Sam knew that dehydration and shock posed immediate threats to her survival, making speed essential despite the apparent impossibility of their circumstances. "Tell me more about your mama," Sam said, hoping to keep Emma alert while he considered their options. "What does she look like?" "She has yellow hair like mine, but longer," Emma replied, unconsciously touching her own tangled locks. "And she wears a blue dress that used to be her mama's. She saved it for special occasions, but when the bad men came, she put it on because she said we needed to look our best when we ran away." The blue fabric Sam had found on the well's edge suddenly took on new meaning. Sarah had worn her mother's dress, probably her finest possession, when making the desperate journey to hide Emma. The detail suggested a woman of dignity and strength, someone who maintained her composure even while facing unthinkable choices. "Did she say where she was going after she left you here?" Sam asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Emma's small face crumpled with fresh grief. "She said she was going to lead the bad men away so they wouldn't find me. She promised she would come back when it was safe, but it's been 2 sleeps and she hasn't come." Sam closed his eyes as the full tragedy of their situation became clear. Sarah hadn't abandoned her daughter. She had sacrificed herself to protect Emma, probably leading dangerous men away from the well with full knowledge that she might not survive the encounter. The mother's courage made Sam's own struggles feel small by comparison. His hand found the locket in his pocket, and he drew strength from its familiar weight. Martha had possessed that same quality of selfless love, the willingness to put others' needs before her own safety. She had insisted on nursing sick neighbors during the fever outbreak that claimed her life, refusing to let Sam turn away people who needed help simply because it might expose her to danger. "I think your mama was very brave," Sam said finally. "And I think she chose this place because she knew someone would find you eventually." "She said God would send someone good," Emma whispered. "Are you someone good?" The question struck Sam with unexpected force. For 3 years, he had questioned his own worth, wondering if his failures as a husband and father disqualified him from claiming any moral standing. But looking into Emma's trusting eyes, he realized that goodness wasn't about past perfection. It was about present choices, about deciding to act with love, even when the outcome remained uncertain. "I'm going to try my best to be," Sam said, and meant it more than any words he had spoken since Martha's death. A new plan began to form in his mind, born of desperation, but grounded in practical experience. Rather than attempting to climb out, with Emma, he would create a pulley system using the materials available. The barn contained extra rope, leather straps, and metal implements that could be fashioned into a more reliable lifting mechanism. "Emma, I need to go back up to get some better equipment," Sam explained. "Can you be brave for me while I'm gone? I promise I'll come right back." The child's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded with the stoic acceptance of someone who had already endured more than any child should face. "Will you leave something with me, so I know you're coming back?" Sam reached into his pocket and withdrew Martha's locket, feeling its weight one final time before placing the chain around Emma's small neck. The silver gleamed dully in the well's dim light, and Emma touched it with reverent fingers. "This belonged to someone very important to me," Sam said. "I'm trusting you to keep it safe until I return." The ascent alone proved much easier than his previous attempts with Emma. The rope held his weight without difficulty, and his hands, freed from the need to protect another person, gripped the stone walls with renewed confidence. Keeper greeted him at the surface with obvious relief, pressing his muzzle against Sam's chest as if to reassure himself that his human companion had survived the ordeal. "Stay here and keep watch," Sam instructed the donkey, though Keeper showed no inclination to leave his post. "I'll be right back." In the barn, Sam worked with renewed purpose, gathering materials for a proper rescue operation. He found a strong oak beam that could serve as a crosspiece, along with the leather harnesses used for hauling heavy loads. Most importantly, he located a set of pulleys that had been gathering dust since Martha's death, equipment originally intended for well maintenance that would now serve to save a life. As he worked, thunder rumbled in the distance, and Sam looked up to see dark clouds building on the western horizon. The sight filled him with urgency. Rain would be a blessing for his drought-stricken land, but it would turn the well into a death trap for Emma. Flash floods were common in this region, and even a moderate rainfall could send water cascading into the well faster than he could pump it out. Time was running out in more ways than one. Sam gathered his improvised rescue equipment and hurried back to the well, where Emma's small voice could be heard singing a lullaby that Sarah had probably taught her. The sound carried up from the depths like a prayer, reminding him that hope persisted even in the darkest places. As he began assembling his pulley system, Sam found himself speaking words he hadn't uttered since Martha's funeral. Not a formal prayer, but a simple request for strength and wisdom from whatever divine power might be listening. Whether God answered such prayers from broken men attempting to mend their failures remained to be seen, but Sam was finally ready to find out. The pulley system proved more effective than Sam had dared hope. Using his father's old mining lantern, a relic from the man's brief time working copper claims in Arizona, Sam descended into the well with steady control, the beam of light cutting through the oppressive darkness like a sword through shadow. The rusty lantern had sat unused in his barn for 15 years, but its solid construction and reliable flame now represented the difference between hope and despair. Emma looked up at him with eyes that reflected the lantern's glow, her small face brightening at his return. She still wore Martha's locket around her neck, clutching it like a talisman against the darkness that surrounded them. The sight of his most precious possession in her tiny hands filled Sam with emotions he couldn't fully identify. grief for what he had lost, determination to protect what remained, and perhaps something approaching peace. "You came back," Emma said, her voice stronger now despite the ordeal. "I sang all the songs Mama taught me while you were gone. She said music makes scary places feel smaller." Sam knelt beside her, setting the lantern on a stone ledge where its light could illuminate their workspace. In the improved visibility, he could see that Emma's injuries were more extensive than he had initially realized. Beyond the obvious damage to her left arm, she bore scrapes and bruises that suggested she had fought against being placed in the torn fabric of her dress told a story of desperation and struggle that made Sam's chest tighten with anger at whoever had forced Sarah into such impossible choices. "You were very brave while I was gone," Sam said, beginning his assessment of how best to secure Emma for the ascent. "Your mama taught you well." "She taught me lots of things," Emma replied, wincing as Sam gently examined her injured arm. "She said that when bad things happen, good people have to take care of each other. Are you going to take care of me?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Emma wasn't just asking about the immediate rescue. She was asking about what would happen afterward, where she would go, who would fill the void left by Sarah's absence. Sam realized that pulling her from the well was only the beginning of his responsibilities. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "I'm going to take care of you." As Sam worked to create a secure harness that would support Emma's weight without aggravating her injuries, she began to share more details about the events that had led to her imprisonment. The story emerged in fragments, told with the emotional honesty of a child who hadn't yet learned to shield others from painful truths. Sarah and Emma had lived on a small farm 3 valleys over, where Sarah's husband, Emma's father, had worked a modest claim that provided enough to support his family. When the drought began, he'd struggled to maintain their livestock and crops, eventually taking loans against the property to buy feed and supplies that would carry them through the dry season. Papa was sick for a long time before he went to Evan, Emma explained as Sam adjusted the rope configuration. His cough got worse and worse, and Mama had to take care of the animals by herself. She was so tired all the time, but she never stopped working. The picture that emerged was heartbreakingly familiar. A family destroyed by circumstances beyond their control, struggling against forces that seemed determined to crush the life from anyone who dared to make a home in this unforgiving land. When Emma's father died, Sarah had been left with debts she couldn't pay and property she couldn't maintain alone. "The bad men came after Papa's funeral," Emma continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They said Mama owed them money, but she said Papa never borrowed anything from them. They were very angry, and they said if she couldn't pay, they would take the farm and everything on it." Sam's jaw clenched as he recognized the pattern. Unscrupulous men had developed a system of creating false debts against struggling properties, then using violence to enforce their fraudulent claims. With local law enforcement stretched thin and courts often days away, these criminals operated with near impunity across the frontier. "Did your mama fight them?" Sam asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Emma nodded solemnly. "She told them they were liars and thieves. She said Papa was an honest man who never cheated anybody, and she wasn't going to let them steal what he worked so hard to build. But there were 3 of them, and they had guns." The confrontation had escalated quickly. When Sarah refused to sign papers transferring ownership of the property, the men had grown violent. They had ransacked the house, destroyed what they couldn't steal, and made it clear that Sarah's continued resistance would result in consequences she wouldn't survive. "Mama packed our things that night," Emma said, unconsciously touching the locket at her throat. "She said we had to run away before they came back. We walked for 2 days, hiding during the day and traveling when the moon was bright. Mama carried me when my feet got too tired, and she shared her water even when I could tell she was thirsty too." Sam's respect for Sarah grew with each detail Emma shared. Faced with impossible odds and mortal danger, The woman had chosen to fight for her daughter's life rather than surrender to despair. Her decision to hide Emma in the well hadn't been abandonment. It had been an act of desperate love by a mother who had run out of options. "She brought me here when the sun was going down," Emma continued, her voice becoming smaller as she relived the traumatic memory. "She said the bad men were getting close, and she needed to lead them away from me. She promised she would come back when it was safe, but if something happened to her, someone good would find me eventually." Sarah had lowered Emma into the well, using rope she had brought for that purpose, sealing the opening afterward to hide any evidence of recent disturbance. The plan had been sound. The well appeared abandoned and offered no obvious reason for searchers to investigate. Unfortunately, Sarah's faith in someone eventually discovering Emma had nearly proven misplaced. "Did she say anything else before she left?" Sam asked, testing the strength of his improved harness system. Emma nodded, tears beginning to flow again, despite her efforts to remain brave. "She told me she loved me more than all the stars in the sky, and that wherever she went, she would always be watching over me. She said if I got scared, I should remember that love never really goes away, even when people do." The words struck Sam with the force of revelation. They were almost identical to something Martha had said during her final delirium, a message about love persisting beyond the boundaries of life and death. Hearing Sarah's wisdom echoed in Emma's innocent voice felt like receiving a message from beyond the grave, a reminder that some truths transcended individual experience. With his preparations complete, Sam attached the lantern to his belt and gathered Emma into his arms. The pulley system distributed their combined weight efficiently, and the stronger rope showed no signs of the stress that had doomed his previous attempts. As they began their ascent toward the circle of sky visible above, Sam found himself thinking about the strange chain of events that had brought them together. Perhaps Keeper's vigil at the well hadn't been mere animal instinct. Perhaps something larger than chance had guided the donkey's attention to this place at precisely the moment when Emma's survival depended on being found. Sam wasn't ready to call it divine intervention, but he was no longer willing to dismiss the possibility entirely. "Look," Emma whispered as they rose through the shaft of fading sunlight, "I can see your friend up there." Keeper's silhouette was visible at the well's rim, backlit by the approaching sunset like a guardian angel with long ears. The sight filled Sam with gratitude for the animal's persistence and loyalty, qualities that had made the difference between life and death for an innocent child. As they finally emerged into the evening air, Sam realized that their ordeal was far from over. Emma needed medical attention, food, and safety from the men who had destroyed her family. But for the first time in 3 years, Sam felt capable of meeting the challenges ahead. He was no longer alone, and neither was she. The extraction from the well had succeeded, but Emma's condition proved more fragile than Sam had initially assessed. Once safely on solid ground, she collapsed against him with exhaustion that went beyond mere physical fatigue. Her body trembled with delayed shock, and her breathing came in shallow gasps that suggested the beginning stages of serious dehydration. Sam carried her to the cabin as thunder continued to rumble overhead, the approaching storm now close enough that he could smell rain in the air. Inside, he settled Emma on Martha's rocking chair, the same chair where his wife had spent countless hours mending clothes and reading scripture. The familiar piece of furniture seemed to offer comfort to the child, who curled into its embrace with visible relief. "Let's get you cleaned up and fed," Sam said gently, moving to light the oil lamp that would provide better illumination than the dying daylight filtering through his small windows. "Then we'll figure out what comes next." As he prepared a basin of water and gathered clean cloths, Sam found himself studying Emma with new eyes. Away from the well's oppressive darkness, he could see that she possessed her mother's determined spirit alongside a gentle nature that reminded him painfully of Lucy. Her blonde hair, though tangled and dirty, caught the lamplight in a way that made his chest tighten with memory. "Mister," Emma said softly as Sam began to clean the scrapes on her arms. "What's your name? Mama always said it was important to know people's names so you could thank them properly." "Samuel Garrett," he replied, surprised to realize they had never been formally introduced despite sharing such an intimate ordeal. "But you can call me Sam." "Thank you, Sam," Emma said with a careful politeness that suggested good upbringing despite her current circumstances. "Mama was right about someone good finding me." Sam felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest at her words. For 3 years, he had questioned his fundamental worth as a human being, wondering if his failures as a protector disqualified him from claiming any moral standing. But Emma's simple faith in his goodness offered a form of absolution he hadn't known he needed. As he tended to her injuries, Emma continued to share memories of her life with Sarah. The picture that emerged was of a close-knit family that had faced adversity with courage and mutual support. Sarah had taught her daughter to read using an old Bible, to tend a small garden that supplemented their modest diet, and to find joy in simple pleasures like wildflower bouquets and evening songs. Mama said that even when bad things happen, there's always something good hiding inside them if you look hard enough, Emma explained, as Sam wrapped a clean bandage around a deep scrape on her elbow. She said Papa getting sick was terrible, but it taught us how precious every day is when someone you love is still with you. The wisdom in Sarah's words struck Sam as profound, the kind of insight that could only come from someone who had faced genuine hardship without becoming bitter. He found himself wondering what other lessons this remarkable woman had passed on to her daughter before their final separation. When Sam opened his food stores to prepare a meal, he was dismayed to find his supplies more depleted than he had realized. The drought had forced him to eat into his reserve provisions, and what remained consisted mainly of hardtack, dried beans, and a small quantity of flour that would need to be stretched carefully. The realization that he now had another mouth to feed added a new dimension to their already complicated situation. While simple fare soaked and cooked, Sam retrieved something from his bedroom that he hadn't touched since Lucy's death. A small, wooden horse he had carved during the winter before her accident. The toy had been one of his daughter's favorites, and Sam had hidden it away after the funeral because seeing it caused too much pain. Now, watching Emma's exhausted posture in Martha's chair, he felt compelled to offer her whatever comfort he could provide. "This belonged to someone very special to me," Sam said, placing the wooden horse in Emma's hands. "I thought you might like to have it while you're staying here." Emma's eyes widened as she examined the carefully crafted toy. Sam had spent weeks working on the details, smoothing every surface, carving tiny flowers into the saddle, ensuring that no sharp edges could hurt small fingers. The horse's expression was gentle and wise, with eyes that seemed almost alive in the lamp's flickering light. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, running her fingers over the polished wood. "Did you make it yourself?" Sam nodded, surprised to find that sharing the toy brought him peace rather than pain. "A little girl named Lucy used to play with it. She would have liked you very much." "Where is she now?" Emma asked, with the innocent directness that children possessed before learning to avoid difficult topics. "She's in heaven with your papa," Sam replied quietly. "They're probably taking care of each other up there." Emma considered this information with the serious expression of a child processing complex emotions. Finally, she hugged the wooden horse to her chest and looked up at Sam with eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. "Mama said that when people we love go to heaven, they don't really leave us. They just become invisible helpers who watch over us and send us signs that everything will be okay. Maybe Lucy sent you to find me." The suggestion hit Sam with unexpected force. He had never considered the possibility that his daughter might somehow be involved in guiding him toward Emma. But the timing seemed too perfect to dismiss as mere coincidence. Keeper's mysterious behavior, his decision to investigate the well, The discovery of Emma at the exact moment when her survival hung in the balance. Perhaps these events weren't as random as they appeared. Thunder crashed overhead with increased intensity, and the first raindrops began pattering against the cabin's roof. Sam felt a mixture of relief and concern as he listened to the approaching storm. The drought-stricken land desperately needed moisture, but Emma's recent trauma made her skittish at loud noises, and the isolation of the ranch during storms could be oppressive. "Are you afraid of thunder?" Sam asked, noticing how Emma tensed at each rumble. "A little," she admitted, "but Mama taught me a game to make it less scary. She said thunder is just the angels moving furniture around in heaven, getting ready for new people to arrive. When I hear it, I try to guess what kind of furniture they're moving." Sam smiled despite himself, charmed by Sarah's creative approach to childhood fears. The woman had possessed a gift for finding light in darkness, hope in despair, qualities that had clearly been passed on to her daughter despite their recent hardships. As the storm intensified outside, Sam found himself thinking about the men who had driven Sarah and Emma from their home. Emma's descriptions suggested they were part of an organized group rather than random criminals, which meant they might have the resources to track their victims across considerable distances. The possibility that these men could still be searching for Emma added urgency to decisions about her future safety. "Emma," Sam said carefully, "when your mama left you at the well, did she say anything about where she was planning to go?" The child's expression grew troubled as she considered the question. "She said she was going to lead the bad men toward the mountains, away from where I was hiding. She thought if they followed her trail, they would get lost in the wilderness and give up looking for us." Sam's admiration for Sarah's strategic thinking was tempered by concern for her fate. Leading dangerous men into remote territory was an act of desperate courage that could easily result in tragedy. If Sarah had been captured or killed, Emma might never learn what had happened to her mother, an uncertainty that could haunt the child for the rest of her life. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, and Sam realized that traveling anywhere tonight would be impossible. Emma needed rest, medical attention, and time to process the traumatic events of recent days. But tomorrow would bring decisions about their future that could determine whether Emma lived in safety or remained vulnerable to the same forces that had destroyed her family. As he tucked a blanket around Emma's small form in Martha's chair, Sam found himself making a silent promise to the memory of his own lost daughter. This time, he would not fail to protect an innocent child placed in his care. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Emma would face them with the full strength of his protection and devotion. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, but inside the cabin, two survivors of tragedy had found each other across the vast emptiness of loss. Dawn broke grey and sullen over the rain-soaked landscape, with puddles reflecting the overcast sky like scattered mirrors across Sam's property. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind the sweet smell of wet earth and the sound of water dripping from the cabin's eaves. For the first time in 8 months, Sam's land showed signs of life, green shoots pushing through the previously barren soil, and the creek running with muddy water that would sustain his remaining cattle for weeks. Emma had slept fitfully in Martha's chair, waking several times with soft cries that suggested nightmares about her ordeal. Each time, Sam had comforted her back to sleep, finding unexpected peace in the simple act of protecting another human being. The wooden horse never left her grasp, serving as an anchor to safety in a world that had recently proved itself capable of unimaginable cruelty. As Emma continued to sleep in the early morning light, Sam decided to examine the area around the well more thoroughly. The rain had washed away surface dust and debris, potentially revealing evidence that might explain how Emma had come to be trapped there. He owed it to both Emma and her mother to understand exactly what had happened during those desperate hours. 3 nights ago, Keeper followed him to the well site, the donkey's usual alertness replaced by a calmer vigilance, now that the immediate crisis had passed. The animal seemed to understand that his vigil had served its purpose, though he remained protective of the general area, as if guarding against future threats. The rain had indeed revealed details that Sam had missed during his initial investigation. Footprints in the softened earth told a story of multiple people moving around the well under cover of darkness. Most disturbing was a pattern of disturbed soil that suggested a struggle had taken place near the stone rim. Sam's attention was caught by something white, partially buried in the mud near the well's base. A piece of cloth that the storm had unearthed from its hiding place beneath accumulated debris. He carefully extracted the fabric, his stomach clenching as he recognized it as a woman's bandana, cotton fabric that had once been white but was now stained with what could only be a blood. The bloodstain was substantial, indicating a serious injury rather than a minor cut or scrape. More troubling was the freshness of the stain. This wasn't old blood that had oxidized to brown, but relatively recent bleeding that retained its reddish color. The implications made Sam's hands shake as he examined the evidence of violence that had occurred at his well. Sarah hadn't simply hidden Emma and departed to lead pursuers away. She had been injured here, badly enough to leave significant blood evidence behind. The struggle patterns in the soil suddenly took on new meaning. Emma's mother had fought desperately against someone who meant them harm, probably suffering. Wounds that would have made traveling difficult or impossible. Sam's mind raced as he reconstructed the likely sequence of events. Sarah and Emma had arrived at the well-seeking shelter, probably planning to rest before continuing their flight from the men who had stolen their property. But their pursuers had caught up with them here, leading to a confrontation that had ended with Sarah wounded and Emma hidden in the well as a last desperate measure to protect her. The revelation transformed Sam's understanding of the situation. Entirely, Emma hadn't been abandoned by a desperate mother. She had been saved by a woman who had paid a terrible price to ensure her daughter's survival. Sarah's fate now seemed tragically clear, and Sam felt a crushing weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He returned to the cabin with heavy steps, finding Emma awake and sitting quietly in Martha's chair while examining the wooden horse with careful attention. Her improved color and alertness suggested that food, rest, and safety were having their intended effect. But Sam knew that her recovery would be complicated by the news he now felt obligated to share. "Good morning, sweetheart," Sam said gently, settling into the chair across from her. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Emma replied, though her expression remained guarded. "The thunder stopped, and my arm doesn't hurt as much. Thank you for taking care of me." Sam nodded, then took a deep breath as he prepared to navigate one of the most difficult conversations of his life. Emma deserved to know the truth about her mother's sacrifice, but she also deserved to have that truth presented in a way that honored Sarah's courage rather than emphasizing the violence that had ended her life. "Emma, I need to tell you something important about your mama," Sam began carefully. "I found some things near the well that help explain what happened the night she brought you here." The child's grip on the wooden horse tightened, and Sam could see her preparing herself for news she suspected would be painful. Her maturity in the face of potential tragedy reminded him again of the remarkable woman who had raised her. "Is Mama hurt?" Emma asked quietly. Sam chose his words with extreme care. "I believe your Mama was very brave when she brought you to the well. She fought hard to protect you from the bad men, and she made sure you were safe even when it became dangerous for her to stay. That's what mothers do when they love their children. They make sure their babies are protected no matter what happens to them." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't break down completely. Instead, she hugged the wooden horse closer and asked the question that Sam had been dreading. "Is she in heaven now with Papa?" The honest answer was that Sam didn't know for certain, but the evidence strongly suggested that Sarah had died defending her daughter. Rather than burden Emma with uncertainty, he decided to provide the comfort of closure while honoring the truth of her mother's sacrifice. "I think she might be," Sam said softly, "but I also think she's watching over you right now, making sure you're safe and loved. That's why she led me to find you. She knew I would take care of you the way she would want." Emma nodded solemnly, processing this information with the resilience that children sometimes displayed in the face of unthinkable loss. After a long moment, she looked up at Sam with eyes that held both grief and determination. "Will you really take care of me, like a papa would?" The question pierced Sam's heart with its simple directness. Emma wasn't asking for temporary shelter or emergency assistance. She was asking for a family, for the kind of permanent love and protection that every child deserved. The request represented both an enormous responsibility and an unexpected opportunity for redemption. "Yes," Sam said without hesitation, "I'll take care of you like a papa would." But even as he made this promise, Sam knew that their situation was far more complicated than a simple adoption. The men who had killed Sarah were still out there, and they might still be looking for Emma. The child represented a loose end in whatever criminal enterprise had destroyed her family. And dangerous. Men rarely left loose ends untied. This realization forced Sam to confront a part of his past that he had hoped never to revisit. Before becoming a rancher, before meeting Martha and settling into domestic life, Samuel Garrett had worn a different kind of responsibility on his chest, a silver star that identified him as a deputy sheriff in the territorial court system. For 8 years, Sam had tracked criminals across the frontier, bringing justice to places where law existed more in theory than practice. He had been good at the work, possessed of the patience and determination that made him effective at following cold trails and building cases that would stand up in court. But the violence inherent in law enforcement had gradually worn at his soul, and when he met Martha, she had convinced him to trade his badge for a plow. That decision had given him 23 years of peace, love, and contentment, but it had also provided him with skills that most ranchers didn't possess: the ability to read sign, to think like a criminal, and to protect the innocent when legal authority wasn't available. Skills that Emma might desperately need if the men who had killed her mother decided to complete their unfinished business. Sam rose from his chair and moved to a wooden chest that had remained locked since Martha's death. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay the tools of his former profession: a Colt revolver, boxes of ammunition, handcuffs, and a silver badge that he had kept as a memento of his years in service. At the bottom of the chest lay something else: a worn notebook containing descriptions and sketches of wanted men he had pursued during his time as a lawman. As he unwrapped the revolver and checked its condition, Sam felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Emma needed more than a guardian. She needed someone capable of standing between her and the forces that had destroyed her family. The gentle rancher who had failed to protect his own daughter would have to remember how to be the relentless lawman who had never let a criminal escape justice. The transformation wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be safe. But as Sam looked at Emma sleeping peacefully in Martha's chair, he knew that some responsibilities transcended personal comfort or safety. This child had been placed in his care by providence, tragedy, and her mother's dying wish. He would not fail her as he had failed Lucy. Whatever it cost him, wherever it led him, Emma would live to grow up free from the shadows that had claimed her parents. The men who had destroyed one family were about to learn that some debts could only be paid in blood. Sam spent the morning creating a detailed plan for Emma's protection, drawing on skills he hadn't used in over 20 years, but found surprisingly intact. The ranch's layout offered both advantages and vulnerabilities: multiple escape routes through the creek bed and hills, but also open ground that would expose them to anyone approaching with hostile intent. His years as a lawman had taught him to think like both predator and prey, and now both perspectives would be crucial for Emma's survival. The child remained unaware of the danger they potentially faced, instead focusing on her recovery with the remarkable resilience that children possessed. She had helped Sam prepare a simple breakfast, chattering about the wooden horse and asking gentle questions about the ranch that suggested she was beginning to think of this place as home. Her innocence made Sam's preparations feel both more urgent and more precious. Around midday, Keeper began displaying signs of agitation that Sam recognized from the donkey's behavior at the well. The animal's ears pricked forward as he stared toward the eastern ridge, his body tense with the alertness that had saved Emma's life. Sam followed the donkey's gaze and spotted what had triggered his concern: 3 riders moving slowly along the tree line, clearly searching for something or someone. "Emma," Sam said carefully, "I need you to go into the cabin and stay away from the windows. We might have visitors, and I want to make sure you're safe while I talk to them." The child's expression grew worried as she picked up on the tension. In Sam's voice, "Are they the bad men?" "I don't know yet," Sam replied honestly, "but until I'm sure they're friendly, I want you to stay hidden. Can you do that for me?" Emma nodded and hurried inside, clutching the wooden horse as if it were a shield against the approaching danger. Sam watched her disappear into the cabin's interior, then turned his attention to the riders, who were now close enough for him to assess their intentions. The 3 men rode with the casual arrogance of people accustomed to intimidating others through reputation and violence. Their leader was a large man with a black beard and clothes that suggested prosperity built on others' misfortune. The 2 companions flanked him with the practiced ease of experienced enforcers, their hands resting casually near their weapons in a display meant to convey both readiness and threat. Sam retrieved his gun belt from the cabin and strapped it around his waist with movements that felt both foreign and familiar. The weight of the Colt revolver against his hip brought back memories of confrontations that had shaped his understanding of human nature's darker aspects. He had hoped never to wear the weapon again, but Emma's safety depended on his willingness to embrace his former profession's requirements. The riders approached the cabin at a deliberate pace, their eyes scanning the property with the systematic attention of men conducting a search. Sam stepped onto the porch and waited for them to make their intentions known. His hands relaxed, but positioned for quick access to his weapon if the situation demanded it. "Afternoon," called the bearded man as they drew within speaking distance. "Fine day after that storm last night. Name's Caldwell, Jack Caldwell. These are my associates, Moore and Peterson." Sam nodded acknowledgement, but didn't offer his own name. The men's introduction felt rehearsed, as if they had delivered it many times while conducting similar searches. Their horses were well fed, and their equipment expensive, confirming his suspicion that these weren't desperate criminals, but organized predators with significant resources. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" Sam asked, his tone neutral but wary. Caldwell smiled with the false warmth of a man accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. "We're looking for a woman and child who went missing a few days ago. Sarah Henderson and her little girl. Families worried sick about them, especially with all the trouble we've been having with bandits in this area." The lies came smoothly, delivered with just enough concern to sound plausible to someone who didn't know the truth. Sam recognized the technique from his law enforcement days. Criminals often posed as concerned parties when searching for their victims, relying on good-hearted people's willingness to help with humanitarian missions. "Haven't seen anyone matching." "That description," Sam replied calmly. "I keep to myself mostly, and visitors are rare out here." Moore, a thin man with nervous eyes, shifted in his saddle and spoke for the first time. "You sure about that? We tracked them this direction, and your place is the only shelter for miles." Sam felt his instincts sharpening as the men's true nature began to reveal itself. Their body language had shifted from casual friendliness to barely concealed aggression, and their questions carried undertones of threat rather than request. These were definitely the men who had killed Sarah, and they suspected that Emma was hidden somewhere on his property. "I'm sure," Sam said firmly. Like I said, I would have noticed strangers. Peterson, the third man, had been quiet during the exchange, but now spoke with the flat delivery of someone accustomed to violence. "Mind if we take a look around? Just to be thorough." The request was phrased politely, but Sam recognized it for what it really was. A demand backed by implicit threat. These men intended to search his property regardless of his permission, and they would use whatever force necessary to accomplish their goal. "Actually, I do mind," Sam replied, his hand moving closer to his weapon. "This is private property, and you don't have any legal authority to search it." Caldwell's false smile faded as the pretense of friendly concern was abandoned. "Legal authority's a funny thing out here, old man. Sometimes what's legal and what's necessary aren't the same." "Thing!" The bearded man's hand dropped to rest on his gun butt, and his companions followed suit with the coordinated movement of a practice team. Sam felt time slow as his old training took over, cataloguing threats and calculating angles with the automatic precision that had kept him alive during his years wearing a badge. "I think it's time for you gentlemen to move along," Sam said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced down dangerous men before. "You're not welcome here." Moore laughed harshly. "You think one old rancher with a gun is going to stop three of us? We've got business to finish, and we're not leaving until we find what we came for." Sam's hand settled on his revolver's grip as he prepared for the confrontation that now seemed inevitable. 20 years of peaceful living had softened some of his edges, but the core skills of survival and protection remained intact beneath the surface. These men had killed Emma's mother and were prepared to kill Emma herself to cover their tracks. A calculation that made Sam's choice simple and absolute. "The child you're looking for is under my protection now," Sam said, his voice carrying the calm certainty of a man who had made his decision. "That means you'll have to go through me to reach her." Caldwell's expression hardened as he realized that intimidation wouldn't work on this particular target. "You don't know what you're getting into, old man. Walk away now, and we'll let you live. Keep interfering, and we'll bury you next to whoever we find in your cabin." The threat against Emma crystallized Sam's resolve into something approaching religious certainty. In his vest pocket, the silver badge that he had carried for 8 years pressed against his ribs like a reminder of oaths sworn and duties accepted. He wasn't just Samuel Garrett the rancher anymore. He was the lawman who had never let criminals escape justice, standing between innocence and evil with the full weight of his oath behind him. "I know exactly what I'm getting into," Sam replied, drawing his revolver with a speed that surprised all three men. "And I know what you did to that child's mother. The only question now is whether you're smart enough to ride away or stupid enough to make this a fight." The moment stretched taut, as both sides calculated odds and consequences. Sam's weapon was drawn and aimed, while theirs remained holstered, giving him a temporary advantage that could disappear in an instant if his nerve failed. But his hands were steady, his aim true, and his resolve absolute. Emma would not suffer the same fate as her mother while he drew breath to prevent it. Caldwell's eyes narrowed as he reassessed the situation. The old rancher had moved with the practiced ease of someone familiar with violence, and his willingness to draw first suggested combat experience that changed the tactical equation significantly. "You're making a mistake," Caldwell said, though his voice carried less confidence than before. "The mistake was yours," Sam replied without wavering. "The moment you decided to hurt innocent people in my territory." Inside the cabin, Emma's frightened voice called out to him, and Sam felt the full weight of his responsibility settle on his shoulders like armor. This child depended on him for protection, just as the frontier communities had once depended on his badge and gun to maintain justice. The context had changed, but the fundamental equation remained the same. Good men stood between evil and innocence, whatever the cost. The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge, with 3 killers. weighing their chances against one determined lawman who had already proven willing to die for the child in his care. Time seemed suspended as both sides prepared for violence that would determine Emma's fate and Sam's redemption. In the distance, thunder rumbled again as another storm approached, but this time the sound carried promise rather than threat. The promise that justice could still be served in a land where law was often measured by the speed of a man's draw and the steadiness of his aim. The standoff shattered when Moore's nerve broke first. His hand jerked toward his weapon with the desperate speed of a man who had realized too late that he was outmatched. Sam's Colt boomed in response, the bullet taking Moore in the shoulder and spinning him from his saddle in a spray of blood and confusion. The gunshot echoed across the ranch like thunder, sending the remaining horses into panicked motion that disrupted Peterson and Caldwell's aim as they attempted to draw their own weapons. Sam threw himself sideways off the porch, rolling behind a water trough that provided minimal cover, but broke their line of sight long enough for him to assess the new tactical situation. Caldwell's voice roared above the chaos. "Kill him! Find the girl!" Peterson spurred his horse toward the cabin while firing wildly in Sam's direction, his shots splintering wood from the porch posts but missing their intended target. Sam rose from behind the trough and put a bullet through Peterson's chest with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed this deadly dance many times before. The man toppled backward off his horse, dead before he hit the ground. Emma's terrified scream from inside the cabin galvanized Sam with protective fury that transcended rational thought. In his vest pocket, the small wooden cross he had carved for Lucy's grave pressed against his ribs, a reminder of the daughter he had failed to save and the child he would die before abandoning. Caldwell had dismounted and taken cover behind, his wounded companion's horse using the panicked animal as a shield while he tried to get a clear shot at Sam. The bearded man was clearly the most experienced fighter of the three, moving with calculated patience that suggested significant combat experience. "You're good, old man," Caldwell called out, his voice carrying grudging respect mixed with lethal intent. "But you can't protect her forever. Even if you kill me, there are others who know about the girl. She'll never be safe as long as she's alive." Sam felt ice form in his chest at the implications of Caldwell's words. Emma represented more than just a witness to her family's destruction. She was apparently connected to something larger, more dangerous than a simple land grab. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything he had imagined. "What do you want?" "With her?" Sam demanded, keeping his weapon trained on the area where Caldwell was concealed while scanning for other threats. Caldwell's laughter carried genuine amusement. "The girl's papa found something before he died, something valuable that belongs to our organization. The woman wouldn't tell us where it was hidden, even when we made it clear what would happen if she didn't cooperate." The truth hit Sam with sickening clarity. Emma's family hadn't been targeted randomly. They had been tortured and killed because her father had discovered something that these men wanted recovered. Sarah's desperate flight with Emma hadn't been about escaping debt collectors, but about protecting information that could expose a larger criminal enterprise. "Sarah didn't know anything," Sam called back, trying to provoke Caldwell into revealing more information. "You killed her for nothing." "Sarah knew," Caldwell replied coldly. "She just chose protecting her daughter over saving her own life. Noble, but stupid. The child must have seen where her papa hid whatever he found. That makes her valuable alive, but only until we extract what we need." Moore was attempting to crawl toward better cover despite his wounded shoulder, leaving a trail of blood in the dust that marked his progress. Sam kept one eye on the injured man while maintaining focus on Caldwell's position, knowing that wounded enemies could still be dangerous if underestimated. Inside the cabin, Emma had grown quiet, which worried Sam more than her previous screaming. He hoped she was following his instructions to stay hidden, but the silence could also indicate that fear had overwhelmed her ability to respond. The thought of that brave little girl, paralyzed with terror, strengthened his resolve to end this confrontation quickly. Keeper had taken shelter behind the barn but remained close enough to serve as an early warning system if additional threats approached the property. The donkey's alertness had saved Emma once before, and Sam was grateful for any advantage in what had become a fight for both their lives. Sam realized that his tactical position was sustainable but not winnable in its current form. Caldwell could maintain his defensive stance indefinitely, waiting for Sam to make a mistake or for reinforcements to arrive. The initiative needed to shift if Emma was to survive the day. Drawing on skills learned during his law enforcement years, Sam began moving systematically to outflank Caldwell's position. He used every piece of cover available: fence posts, equipment, even the slight depression where the well had been filled, to close the distance between himself and his opponent without exposing himself to fatal gunfire. The wooden cross in his pocket seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, reminding him that this fight was about more than survival. It was about redemption, protection, and the sacred duty to shield innocence from evil. Lucy's memory guided his steps as he maneuvered toward the final confrontation that would determine Emma's fate. Sam's flanking movement brought him to within 20 yards of Caldwell's position when the bearded man made his fatal mistake. Assuming that Sam would continue using the water trough for cover, Caldwell shifted his aim toward that location just as Sam emerged from behind the barn with a clear shot at his opponent's exposed torso. The Colt bucked in Sam's hand, sending a bullet that caught Caldwell's center mass and dropped him to his knees. But the man's toughness proved extraordinary. Instead of falling, he raised his own weapon with grim determination and fired a shot that creased Sam's left arm, sending burning pain through muscle and bone. Sam ignored the wound and advanced. On his opponent, Martha's wedding ring, hanging from a chain around his neck, catching the afternoon's sunlight like a talisman. The simple gold band had become his anchor to everything good and pure in his life, a reminder that love persisted even beyond death and that some causes were worth dying for. Caldwell's second shot went wild as strength ebbed from his wounded body, but he managed to maintain his grip on his weapon while attempting to bring it to bear on Sam's approaching figure. The man's eyes held the desperate fury of someone who had never expected to be outmatched by a simple rancher, and his voice carried venom when he spoke his final words. "You think killing me ends this? There are more of us than you can count. Old man, the girl will never be safe." Sam's third shot ended Caldwell's threats permanently, the bullet taking him in the heart and dropping him to the dusty ground beside his fallen companions. The silence that followed felt profound after the violence of the gunfight, broken only by the whisper of wind through the grass and the distant sound of Keeper moving restlessly behind the barn. Moore was still alive, but badly wounded, his face pale with blood loss and shock. Sam approached him carefully, keeping his weapon ready in case the man posed a continued threat. But Moore's fighting spirit had been broken along with his body, and he looked up at Sam with the resignation of someone who understood that his life was forfeit. "Please," Moore whispered, his voice barely audible, "don't let me die like this." Sam knelt beside the wounded man, feeling an unexpected surge of compassion for someone who had come to kill Emma, but was now facing his own mortality with frightened eyes. His years as a lawman had taught him that even criminals were human beings, deserving of basic dignity in their final moments. "Tell me about the organization Caldwell mentioned," Sam said quietly. "How many others are there? Who else knows about Emma?" Moore's eyes flickered with something approaching gratitude for Sam's gentle tone. "Dozen men, maybe more, based out of Millerville, 2 days south. They call themselves the Reclamation Company, but they're just thieves with fancy papers. These information provided crucial intelligence about the scope of the threat facing Emma. A dozen men represented a significant force that could overwhelm Sam's defenses if they decided to pursue their interest in the child. But it also suggested that the organization was small enough to be disrupted if approached strategically. "What did Emma's father find?" Sam pressed, knowing that understanding the stakes would be crucial for protecting her. Moore coughed, bringing up blood that stained his lips. Mining survey maps, government documents showing silver deposits that haven't been claimed yet. Worth a fortune to the right people. The revelation explained everything. Emma's father had discovered valuable information during his work, probably mineral surveys that could direct legitimate claims to rich deposits. The reclamation company had killed him to steal that information, then pursued Sarah and Emma to eliminate witnesses and recover any documents that might have been hidden. "Where are the documents now?" Sam asked. "Don't know," Moore replied honestly. "Sarah never told us, even when Caldwell—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would have described the torture that had preceded Sarah's death. A sound from the cabin's doorway made Sam turn to see Emma standing in the opening. Her small face pale but determined. She clutched the wooden horse in one hand while using the doorframe for support with the other, clearly fighting against fear to emerge from hiding. "Is it over?" she asked in a small voice. Sam holstered his weapon and moved toward her, his heart breaking at the courage she displayed despite everything she had endured. This child had lost her parents, been trapped in a well, and now witnessed a gunfight that had claimed 3 lives, yet she still found the strength to face the world with hope in her eyes. "It's over, sweetheart," Sam said, gathering her into his arms with infinite gentleness. "The bad men can't hurt you anymore." Emma buried her face against his shoulder, her small body shaking with relief that seemed to drain all the tension from the past days. In that moment, Sam felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the guilt and grief that had bound him since Lucy's death, replaced by a fierce protectiveness that gave new meaning to his existence. Behind them, Moore's breathing grew labored as his wounds claimed the last of his strength. Sam made no effort to provide medical aid. The man had come to kill Emma, and justice demanded that he face the consequences of his choices. But he also felt no satisfaction in the death, only a grim recognition that sometimes violence was the only language that evil understood. As Emma's tears gradually subsided, Sam realized that their ordeal was far from over. The reclamation company would eventually discover that their men had failed to return, and they would send others to investigate. But for now, in this moment of hard-won peace, he allowed himself to feel hope for their future together. Emma had found her protector, and Sam had found his redemption. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family, forged in tragedy, but strengthened by love. 3 months later, Sam stood on his porch, watching Emma play with Keeper in the pasture, where green grass now grew thick and strong. The drought had finally broken completely, bringing regular rains that had transformed his struggling ranch into something approaching the paradise Martha had envisioned when they first claimed this land. The sight of Emma's laughter echoing across the property filled spaces in his heart that had been empty for far too long. The child had healed remarkably well, both physically and emotionally. Her injured arm had mended without lasting damage, and the nightmares that had plagued her first weeks in his care had gradually faded into peaceful sleep. She had thrown herself into ranch life with enthusiasm that reminded Sam daily of Lucy's own boundless energy, though Emma possessed a thoughtful wisdom that spoke to the trials she had endured. The wooden horse had become her constant companion, but it no longer served as a security blanket against fear. Instead, it had evolved into a beloved toy that accompanied her on adventures around the property, helping her explore every corner of what she now called home. Sam had carved additional animals to join the horse, a lamb, a cat, and most recently, a donkey that bore an unmistakable resemblance to Keeper. The legal arrangements for Emma's adoption had been surprisingly straightforward once Sam had contacted the territorial authorities. His reputation from his law enforcement days had smoothed the process, and the documentation of the reclamation company's crimes had provided clear justification for Emma's need for protection. The judge who finalized the adoption had commented, that he rarely saw such an obvious case of a child and guardian being perfectly matched. Emma's integration into their small community had been equally successful. The few remaining neighbors had welcomed her with warmth that demonstrated the frontier's capacity for embracing those in need. Mrs. Henderson from the next valley over had volunteered to help with Emma's education, bringing books and teaching, materials that ensured the child's schooling would continue despite their remote location. Most surprisingly, Emma had shown remarkable resilience when it came to processing the loss of her parents. She spoke of Sarah and her father with love, but without the paralyzing grief that Sam had feared might overwhelm her. Instead, she seemed to understand intuitively that her parents had given their lives to ensure her survival, and she honored their memory by embracing the future they had died to protect. "Papa Sam!" Emma called from the pasture, using the name she had chosen for him without prompting or suggestion. "Look what Keeper taught me!" Sam smiled as he watched her demonstrate a simple trick she had trained the donkey to perform, bowing on command in exchange for a handful of oats. The sight of child and animal working together in perfect harmony filled him with contentment that had seemed impossible just months before. The reclamation company had indeed sent men to investigate their missing operatives, but they had found only graves and a determined former lawman who made it clear that further interference would result in the same fate. Word had eventually reached Sam through territorial channels that the organization had disbanded after several key members were arrested on federal charges. Emma's safety was finally assured. The mystery of the mining survey documents had been solved when Emma had mentioned quite casually that her father had hidden important papers inside her favorite doll before the bad men had come. The doll had been among the few possessions Sarah had managed to save during their flight, and it now rested on a shelf in Emma's room, along with the valuable documents that had cost her family so dearly. Sam had decided that the maps would remain hidden until Emma was old enough to decide their fate for herself. Inside the cabin, the walls now displayed evidence of their growing family bond. Alongside Martha's Bible and Sam's few remaining mementos of his previous life, hung Emma's artwork, her attempts at writing letters, and most precious of all, a daguerreotype portrait taken during their last trip to town. The photograph showed Sam and Emma standing together beside Keeper, all three of them squinting slightly against the photographer's harsh lighting, but unmistakably content. The image had become Sam's most treasured possession, representing the family that had been, born from tragedy, but nurtured into something beautiful and permanent. When visitors saw the photograph, they often commented on the obvious love and connection between the man and child, noting that they looked like they had always belonged together. Emma's bedtime routine now included prayers for her parents in heaven, gratitude for her new life with Papa Sam, and requests for continued protection for their small family. Sam had returned to reading Martha's Bible, finding comfort in passages about redemption, second chances, and the mysterious ways that love could emerge from loss. The well where Emma had been trapped was now permanently sealed and marked with a simple stone monument that bore Sarah's name and the inscription, "A mother's love endures forever." Emma had helped Sam choose the words, and she often placed wildflowers on the marker when they bloomed in the surrounding meadow. As evening approached, and Emma came running toward the cabin with Keeper trotting behind her, Sam reflected on the strange journey that had brought them together. He had begun these months as a broken man, haunted by failure and loss, convinced that his story was effectively over. But Emma's arrival had shown him that endings could also be beginnings, that the love we give away comes back to us in unexpected forms. "Papa Sam," Emma said as she climbed the porch steps, slightly out of breath from her play. "Tomorrow, can we go visit Mama Sarah's marker? I found some new purple flowers that I think she would like." "Of course, sweetheart," Sam replied, lifting her into his arms for their evening ritual of watching the sunset together. "We'll take Keeper with us and make it a proper visit." As they settled into Martha's old rocking chair, now officially their chair for sunset watching, Sam felt the deep peace that comes from understanding one's purpose in life. He had been given a second chance at fatherhood, and Emma had been given the loving home that every child deserved. The harsh frontier had taken much from both of them, but it had also given them each other. In the distance, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and Sam found himself thinking of Martha and Lucy, of Sarah and Emma's father, of all the love that had shaped their lives and continued to guide their steps. The dead were not truly gone, as long as their love lived on in the choices of those who survived them. Emma's head grew heavy against his shoulder as the day's adventures caught up with her, and Sam began humming a lullaby that Martha had once sung to Lucy. The melody drifted across the peaceful ranch, carrying with it the promise that tomorrow would bring new opportunities for joy, growth, and the simple miracle of a family choosing to love each other despite everything the world had tried to take away. In this moment, surrounded by the evening sounds of their thriving land and holding the child who had saved his soul as surely as he had saved her life, Sam Garrett finally understood that some stories end exactly as they should, with love triumphant over loss, hope stronger than despair, and the unshakable faith that grace can be found in the most unexpected places.